Welcome to another edition of the Dakotans Election Central, where we are comprehensively covering the 2024 North Dakota election cycle. Today, I am joined by our state representative representing us in the United States Congress, Kelly Armstrong. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And obviously, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about your governor campaign, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I love this state. I've been here my whole life. The greatest privilege I've had is representing North Dakota in D.C. for the last 5 years. But I've also learned in the last 5 years, if we wait for D.C. to solve our problems, we're going to be waiting a long time. So We're going to try and bring the fight back home.
And so you went and you created this great wave in North Dakota by running for governor, because then our House seat opens up and there's all that going on there, and it's all your fault because you're here.
Just trying to help all the people in political media make ends meet. So.
Exactly. We really appreciate it. That being said, and obviously it'd probably be more Governor Burgum's fault than your fault, but with the amount of change that North Dakotans are going to feel this year, do you think there's a cause for concern? There's more change going on this year than there have been in several years in the political landscape at the state level for North Dakota.
No, I think it's great. I do. I think two things with any organization, whether it's Congress, whether it's a business, I think the biggest problems you can have is too much turnover or not enough turnover.
Yeah.
These are great seats. We've been pretty dominant as a Republican Party. We've got good people running, and I think it keeps everybody interested and focused on what we really need to accomplish as a state.
Absolutely. As we've gone through these conventions and stuff, the endorsing conventions by the districts, we're seeing an interesting trend happen in the Republican Party, which maybe was spurred on because of 2 years ago and a lot of conversation that was had at our state convention. But we're starting to see some incumbent candidates skip the endorsing convention and run straight in the primary.
Well, not just incumbents. I think my opponent's doing the same thing. So.
Absolutely. And I was going to ask you about that. Do you think that's healthy?
No, but I'm biased. I was a state party chair for 3 years, and I worked really hard. And I think if you stop engaging with and listening to and going out and meeting with the grassroots, I think you run the risk of not actually understanding what people on the ground really care about. I love the state convention. Everybody gets to run the race however they want. I'm never going to tell them. But I also think it's one thing to skip a convention. It's another thing to not participate in any of this stuff.
Yeah,
decisions are made by the people who show up.
Right.
But if you want to make the decisions, you should probably also show up.
So does it risk having a system where money suddenly begins to play a huge factor in who is able to get elected?
Well, I think we've seen that. And that's a national trend as well, right? I mean, we when I ran for Congress in 2018, I told everybody I was going to honor the convention. I felt, and I would have, no matter what the results. I mean, just coming off of being the state party chairman, it's pretty hard to lead an organization for 3 years and then say it doesn't matter. And I'm excited to go to the convention. But you also play at the rules as they are, not as the rules as you wish they were. But this is probably going to be the most, it's going to be more expensive than the last cycle, which was probably more expensive than the last cycle before that.
In some incredible way that you don't win that endorsement, would you go to the primary this year?
I think, again, you play with the rules as they are, not as they wish you were. If you could get everybody who is running for all of these offices to agree to go to the convention and fight it out, I could probably do that. But, the House race is unique, too, because of some rules they have at the party structure. I wish we stayed at the convention. I wish we managed our fights as they went. And then I also think it helps people get more engaged there. But it really is, Virginia used to have it. They don't have it anymore. Yeah. Utah used to have it. They didn't have it anymore. Pretty hard to look at people in the eye and say, we're going to decide this in a convention hall instead of the ballot booth in June. And I understand why people like that as well.
Right. Absolutely. So we jumped out firing out of the gate. We were just firing away. Let's roll it back a few years. I meet you in high school. Tell me about who I would be meeting. What was Kelly like back then? You
would have met a very average wrestler, a terrible baseball player, kind of a Weisenheimer. I was student body president my senior year of high school, and somebody who I hope worked to, include everybody and try and do all of those things. We had a lot of fun. I always say if there was social media when I was in high school, I'm not sure I'd be running for office anymore, but I think that's, I actually think it's one of the biggest things we face as a country moving into the 21st century. And it's not a partisan issue. What does privacy look like?
Right.
So we had a lot of fun. We spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of time in Western North Dakota with a stick and a string chasing around mule deer and speed goats.
Okay, there you go. So with that background, what inspired you to get into politics then?
Well, so I was in student government in high school. I was in student government in college. Then I met my wife, who's from Oslo, Norway. Started a law practice there. Then came back and worked for my dad's small business, oil and gas. We owned a sports bar in Dickinson. We owned a farm. Did all of that. And what inspired me to get in politics was the oil boom in western North Dakota, and I was complaining about some things, and they weren't seeming to get fixed. And some close friend, the person who was in the North Dakota State Senate, had announced they were retiring. And so instead of just complaining, I decided to run for it, and really, really enjoyed my time in the state Senate in North Dakota.
This is something that is maybe not unique to North Dakota, but is precious and special about North Dakota, is the ability for someone to see a problem, get tired of the problem, and be able to do something about it.
Yeah, I think we have the greatest legislative. I mean, North Dakota has, and I know, like all politics, has gotten more national and more critical and stuff like that. But whether it's your school board, your county commission, your park board, your volunteer legislature, North Dakota really has it figured out. Because everybody who serves in the legislature has to go back to their community. I mean, they're only in Bismarck once every 2 years for 80 days, and it really is something special.
Absolutely. Now you're running for governor for this great state of North Dakota. Do you ever stop to just think about it for a moment of where life has taken you? There's some pretty neat things. Is it a bit surreal to realize that you've been able to represent North Dakota in Congress? Now you have an opportunity to be governor of this great state?
Yeah, I think about it that way. So my favorite thing to do, and it's always been my favorite thing to do, everybody kind of has their thing. I like to talk to seniors in high school.
Okay.
Like close-up classes. We'll go to government affair classes. We try not to talk about politics, but more about public service.
Right.
I always say if you want to be anonymous, move to a big city.
Yeah.
Get active, get engaged, do those things. I've always, I've never really planned. Life moves too fast, right? There's never a perfect time to have a kid. There's never a perfect time to get married. There's never a perfect time to buy a house. There's never a perfect time to run for office. You just see something and you react. And I always think the single best way to prepare yourself for whatever happens next is do the job you're doing now well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we were talking before we started recording that this has been a very busy stretch in your schedule with all the district endorsing conventions that are happening across North Dakota. What's some of the feedback and concerns that you might be hearing from some of the constituents?
Property taxes. It's obviously top of mind. Federal regulation and state regulation, dealing with that. I mean, the border is obviously a huge issue. I've been actively engaged in that since I got to Congress in 2018. So, we talk schools, teaching, communities, small towns. It depends where you're at, right? For all the growth in North Dakota over the last 15 years, we still have a lot of communities that are struggling to find workforce, struggling to find housing, struggling to find some of those things. So, it's really those kind of issues. I just always, what's really become apparent, and this is something I've known for, a while here, is we can fight droughts, floods, tornadoes, all of those different issues. But the overbearing reach of the federal government is just starting to make everything harder. And the same with growth in government in North Dakota.
Absolutely. So with that basis, what are maybe your top 3 issues, or as you say, priorities, your top priorities for North Dakota?
Well, I think, every governor, and we've had 3, I consider the last 3 governors friends of mine, last 4 governors friends of mine, and each one has had unique challenges. I think the challenges we face now is how do we continue with our 2 biggest sectors, which are ag and energy, and how we continue to move forward when there's these constant pressures. And it's not just government pressures, right? It's consumer pressure, it's activist investor groups, and how we continue to do what we do best, which is feed and fuel the world and fight against the things that make North Dakota not North Dakota.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the property tax spending, something that we hear a lot about is cut back the wasteful government spending. And then the other thing we hear about is get rid of property tax. Do you feel like there's some proposals that are out there? I don't want you to comment necessarily on those unless if you feel like you want to, but do you feel that creating these initiated measures where we're affecting government is the best way for North Dakota, or some of this stuff should be going on in the legislature?
Well, I think when you have the initiated measure process, I would prefer most of them were legislative. instead of constitutional. I think the Constitution is kind of the skeleton of what you're dealing with, and the bones and the muscle and the nerves is what the legislative is. But no, people have a right to petition. They have a right to go forward. They have a right to do it. North Dakotans are fiercely proud of it. Yeah. And it's a reaction if they think the legislative body is not necessarily doing the same thing. But there's always the catch-22. We don't want to be California either, where 60 to 70% of your budget has already been spent on initiated measure proposals. So when you go into the legislature, we just talked earlier about we have the best legislative process in the country. Yeah. We want them to be able to do their work. But when people are frustrated and they think their taxes are too high, or they think something isn't moving fast enough, they should have the right to do it.
Right. And so a measure that was taken care of in the last process was term limits. And it's interesting. We won't feel the effects of it this year. But in 4 years, we'll start feeling the effects of what term limits actually means.
I think every governor now who has the great privilege of serving in that role and getting reelected will have a brand new legislature.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's 8-year term limits.
That's scary.
And I think this might seem as a weird answer for somebody running for governor. I think we have to make sure that the executive branch doesn't get too top heavy.
Yeah.
Every single district in North Dakota elects people to go to Bismarck. They elect them to be their representative. And so we have to figure out a way in where you do, your agencies and you do your strategic planning. And you also have the ability to educate the legislators that are coming in without making it feel like you're pressuring them.
Right.
And I'll give you my perfect example. When I got elected to the state senate from Dickinson, I thought water came out of a faucet.
Yeah.
Water policy is hugely confrontational at a lot of times, and it's different in different parts of the state. And it was something I was on the Natural Resources Committee, so you have to learn about water. I knew nothing about water when I got there.
Yeah.
And was still learning when I ran for Congress. So I think we have to have the ability to make sure that we are providing as much information to people, particularly with term limits, as possible, without them feeling like they're getting run over by the executive branch.
Right. But what's interesting is some of the people that will be rising up are ones that feel like they're trying to get in there to make that difference right out of the gate. They don't have that senior leadership. So there almost becomes a subgroup that may begin to influence politics a little bit for North Dakota. How does that work?
Well, I think everybody, we talked about money in politics earlier, but I think also money's never been more important in politics than it is right now, but it's also never necessarily been less determinative. You can run a really good grassroots campaign. You can do really, really cool things on social media, and you can do some different things and have a way to do it. But anybody who's willing to take 80 days out of their life, go to Bismarck, get involved, get engaged, for whether it's a social issue, a fiscal issue, a water issue, a farming issue, an oil and gas issue. I just hope if that's the issue that brought them to the table, they're going to have, that's not the only issue they're going to have to work on. You touch so many different things at the legislature. And then the key is just to make sure you can provide that information in as complete and non-confrontational manner as possible.
Absolutely. So do you feel like right now that the budget that we have in North Dakota is a little bit fat, that there's stuff that needs to be cut out?
Yeah. How do you make a liberal or a conservative a liberal? Give them a surplus. And by the way, I'm part of this, right? I grew up politically in the oil boom.
Yeah.
I sponsored the largest infrastructure bill in the history of the state of North Dakota because we needed it.
Right.
And government had to grow. When you have a town like Watford City that had 1,600 people, that went to 16,000 people basically overnight, you can't update or modify their water treatment plant.
Right.
You have to build a new one.
Yeah.
But that growth has continued.
Right.
And I think my number one focus will be to figure out how many of our agency dollars, how many of our taxpayer dollars are not consumer facing.
Okay.
Like if you have, how much out of every dollar is actually going to provide the service you're doing? Right. And by the way, some of those problems are federal too, right? You have federal regulatory requirements, but there is no doubt that North Dakota government can get leaner and meaner and get smaller and do better as well.
Absolutely. And then the border, I wanted to talk on that for a moment because that's another thing that's creeping in. We're seeing a rise of fentanyl in the state. What's actually something we can do about this? Because it feels like we're so far away from the southern border. Does it touch us?
Yeah. There's a lot of different things. We just had a National Guard group down there. They had the single most number from North Dakota number of contacts. But it really is a frustrating process. Right. The only time the Biden administration gets involved in this is when they sue states for trying to do it down in Texas.
Yeah.
But one of the things we can do, we have some of the best, I used to do this work. We have some of the best U.S. attorneys in the world. They have busted it both at the Attorney General's office and in the U.S. Attorney's office.
Yeah.
They have busted large international drug rings in the past.
Wow.
And we can deal with that. But then we just have to give our federal delegation as much support as we can, because, we are about as far away from the southern border as possible, but we have a pretty significant northern border too.
We do.
And I have a lot of people that work and live on the northern border that are really, do you know how frustrating it is when you can't have dinner with your friends on the other side of the border for normal, reasonable, lawful commerce, and you're watching what's going on at the southern border?
Yeah.
So I was proud, last September I negotiated with the Freedom Caucus and we introduced the toughest border security bill and actually the toughest spending bill that had come off the floor of Congress, and unfortunately we couldn't get it across the finish line. But we really have to continue to put as much pressure on the Biden administration as possible. But the real answer is we need to elect Donald Trump.
So we need to and you've endorsed him previously with Donald Trump. Why do you think it's imperative that we do that and not versus another candidate?
Well, not just one, because he's going to be the nominee.
Yeah.
Everybody took their shot. They missed. And he wasn't an incumbent. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I love open primaries. I love the primary process. I'm an old political guy at heart. But I watched what happened when President Biden came in and rescinded 3 executive orders within the first week. And if you want to go back to the nexus of where this problem really started, it started there. But it's not just that. It's ag, it's energy, it's small business, it's regulatory. There's some monstrosity of a methane emission bill being published by the EPA either today or tomorrow that is absolutely detrimental to North Dakota ag, energy, and coal. And we need people back in that office. And I think Donald Trump has been the best president for North Dakota in my lifetime.
Absolutely. So in the coming years, what do you believe that North Dakota should be concerned about and maybe even be proactive against protecting against?
Oh, well, I think the first thing is all the big fights we're winning. Right now there's 3 cases being heard either today or tomorrow at the Supreme Court on censorship, on disinformation, on all of these things. And I'm in every one of these fights in D.C., right? Whether it's social justice, whether it's saying people who read the Bible and are military veterans from the Midwest are most likely to be susceptible to disinformation, which is the most condescending thing I've ever heard, and we're spending federal dollars on it. Yeah. But also, we have a really unique opportunity to go after some of these things, and I think my 6 years in D.C. and my 6 years in the legislature have given me really good ideas of the pressure points where North Dakota can engage and say, hey, no, you've never had dirt under your fingernails a day in your life. Quit telling us how to do what we know how to do.
Right. I want to switch the game a little bit and talk about some social issues that have come up across the United States. One of them is the Tennessee governor recently signed a bill that was protecting his employees, government employees, against, giving them the ability to choose whether or not they wanted to perform a marriage. It left it to personal choice. Do you think legislation like that is something that North Dakota should have?
I would have to see the legislation. When the Oberfell case came out, I was state party chair. I thought that was a terrible decision.
Okay.
I thought that, it is a states' rights thing. It is those types of things. I think there are ways in which nobody should ever have to, and that's what I get always a little frustrated when people start talking about protected class. My grandpa was a 5 days go to mass a week Catholic.
Yeah.
He didn't walk away from the Catholic Church when he went and painted houses.
Right.
Nobody should have to do something that violates their religious beliefs. And there's ways to do both of those things.
Absolutely. Do you see this being a problem that will come to North Dakota more, where there will be protections that are needed in place for those parties, such as pastors, such as government?
No, I think pastors, I think the religious liberty part of that, we're pretty good in North Dakota. We've got some of, those laws and those different things. But I also think, you always have to be vigilant of those things and making sure that there isn't an over encroachment on things. North Dakota's a socially conservative state.
Absolutely.
And we should be able to honor those things.
Under our current governor, which he's done many fantastic things, but there's something that if you go back to with the crypto, when he was really focused on that, there was somebody that he was the CEO of the company that he was working with, had a troubled past. Do you think it's important that we are...
Somebody should read Positively Fifth Street. It's a story about it's a story about the World Series of Poker and dealing with those kind of things. So,
right. But do you think it's important that when we're working with some of those people at the state level that we're worried about what they're... I think he was something with murdering someone, stuff like that. Do you think it's important that we vet them? And
North Dakota was never built in a boardroom.
Yeah.
And I think it's really, I mean, we want to attract all kinds of different people here. We want to attract investment. We have such tremendous natural resources. We have all of those things for all of that. But I think, I mean, without the specific, yeah, you can vet people, you can do all of that, but we got to make sure we're growing the North Dakota way.
Right.
I mean, we have, and I do this all the time in DC, you know, people think of us as flyover country and they think of farmers as something very different. We have some of the most advanced business people in the world.
Right.
And a lot of them are running family farms.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep,
we have
you're right.
Grand Farm in Fargo. We have, most of the oil business and the expansion isn't Exxon. It's not Shell. It's not ConocoPhillips. It's
Right.
like Steyr Oilfield Service. And it's my friends and my buddies who've been trying to scratch a living out of that dirt for 3 generations. We can grow, but we also want to make sure we keep North Dakota, we keep our values and keep our value chain, because you know what else? When people get here, they kind of like it.
Absolutely. All right, let's switch this up. It's been a good time, but let's have some fun. Let's do a rapid fire segment.
Okay.
UND hockey or NDSU football?
UND hockey.
I knew that one was an easy one.
My dad wrestled at NDSU. My uncle played football at NDSU. So we have this fight over Thanksgiving dinner too.
There you go. Favorite baseball team?
New York Mets.
Okay.
Dickinson Rough Riders American Legion baseball team, because that's who I used to coach. But professionals, I was 10 years old in 1986.
And so you recently said on a different interview that you might be the first governor to openly state that you're
I'm a Mets fan. Yeah.
Best high school in North Dakota?
Dickinson High.
Yeah.
And they've had a great couple weeks in sports, which has been fun to watch.
Beat Minot High in hockey. Favorite UND memory?
Favorite UND memory is the week of the flood. It sounds weird. But we were all, you know, I went to school with people from Grand Forks, so we were all sandbagging. We were all out helping. We were helping local people, but then we were also having a lot of fun at night. So you'd get done sandbagging at dark. You'd go out and, you know, have a good time with your friends. You'd be up the next morning sandbagging. And it was just really, it was my first kind of, you know, you were involved in like charities and some of those things, but it was really the camaraderie of trying to protect. We didn't succeed, but the entire campus and at least my entire friend group was really trying to protect a community from something that we, you know, this force that you can't even see yet, which is the flooding Red River. And it was really, really, you know, it was the first time you saw governors, you saw mayors with shovels and filling sandbags. And it was really the first time, at least in my adult life, where I saw what North Dakota could be.
So, and this is interesting because it seems like the troubling times that North Dakota has faced, it always brings them together. You have that flood. Many people that I've had on this, when I ask them about something, it revolves around adversity. I think that's a great thing about North Dakota. Go ahead.
Oh, no.
Favorite restaurant in North Dakota? You've been on the road so there's a lot of them you've been able to try recently.
Bonzer's in Grand Forks.
Okay. And best thing about North Dakota?
The people.
The people.
And second best thing is the American Legion and high school baseball fields.
Very good. So in the last month or so, there's been an incident at a mega church in Texas with guns, shooting that happened there. There was an incident at the Kansas City Chiefs parade, Super Bowl parade with guns. Is it time that laws are enacted to limit accessibility of guns?
No, not to lawful gun owners. We have a Second Amendment, and we have it for a reason. And I've said this 1,000 different times in various different hearings in D.C. Enforce the gun laws you have. Figure out better ways to make sure you're tracking people who aren't allowed to buy guns. Get rid of straw purchases, which are already illegal. Massively go after people and I'm an ex-defense attorney, right? So minimum mandatory sentences aren't really my thing. But if you're going to prosecute people for guns, prosecute the people who have them and have committed a crime with them. Because I've never seen anything yet. You know, like everybody talks about red flag laws, but I've never seen one that actually protects Second Amendment rights and due process rights. Okay. So the answer to all of this is we have laws on the books that can get you do those things, but trying to ask someone, and it also has to be constitutional. You know, one of my biggest frustrations in D.C. is they talk about assault weapons bans. Well, outside of everything else, the Supreme Court has ruled common use a thing. AR-15s are one of the most commonly owned guns in the United States. It's unconstitutional to go after them, so it's really just politicking and a waste of time.
Absolutely. Good answer. Our country was founded on, with an understanding of the importance of religion. There's references to God in the Declaration of Independence. Do you think it's important to have godly influence on decisions that are made in regards to our state?
Yeah, and I think we saw it last week just in a real world. There was a reporter on MSNBC that said anybody who believes your rights are ordained from God is a Christian nationalist.
Yes.
I'm like, it's the first sentence of the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence.
Right.
Like it's actually in there. And anybody who thinks government creates your rights is living in the wrong country. And more importantly, they are very, very, I would just be skeptical of that. So yeah, I mean, I grew up, my mom was a Catholic kindergarten teacher. My dad grew up Lutheran, Good Shepherd in Bismarck. I mean, it's a huge part of who we are, and it's a huge part of how you make good decisions.
Absolutely. So we've heard a lot, and it's been a great interview. It's been interesting. But what do you think makes you most qualified for governor of North Dakota? I know you have a huge pedigree, but
yeah, I mean, so my political background is great. I've only been doing this for about 11 years. I think people forget that, but I think, I grew up in the two biggest industries we have, which is ag and energy. I did those things. I was a volunteer fireman. I was American Legion baseball coach. I helped build our new hospital. I helped build our new junior high when I moved back to Dickinson. I have two kids in public school in North Dakota, and so we've been actively engaged in all of. I've lived in the West. I grew up in Dickinson. I bought my first business. Bought my first house in Grand Forks.
Wow.
And I've worked really, really hard over my entire time in this to make sure that we listen to the people that exist from our biggest communities to our smallest communities, from the east to the west. And I think we have a really good pulse on what we need to do in North Dakota, but also have a really good idea of where we can push the pressure points to let us advance in ways that I think are going to be great for North Dakota's future.
Absolutely. So if you are elected, a lot of times I guess a lot of attention is drawn to a president's first 100 days in office, right? What are you going to get done? And governor's different. I understand you're not running for president, but what are some of the immediate things that you would want to see happen?
Well, I think one of the differences, right? You get sworn in the middle of December. The legislative session starts in January.
Yeah.
Right. it may be significantly different if you were replacing a Democrat in office.
Yeah.
But you're going to walk in. I think I'll have a better ability to adapt at that right away because I have been in the legislature.
Right.
But I think the first thing we're going to have, there's going to be a property tax measure, and if it's on the ballot, people are going to vote one way or the other. But if that ballot would pass, you're going to have to rewrite about a third of the Century Code.
Wow.
Because property tax and local share exists, which will be obviously, and if it doesn't pass, the property tax fight isn't going away.
No.
So figuring out, I think the first thing I'm going to do when I walk in is what I said earlier. What percentage of every dollar that this agency takes in is consumer facing?
Okay.
And if it's not, and I'm going to guarantee you, I think more of it should be.
Right.
And so figure out how we can look at those things, go to the legislature and say, we can deliver this service cheaper and probably actually better if we do some things that way.
Right. Absolutely. Focus on budget.
When you've had, Governor Burgum, Governor Dalrymple, Governor Hoeven, Governor Schaefer, every one of them has had their own different personalities and their own stamps to put on it.
Yep.
But we've had, the United States, I don't think anybody thinks is on the right track, but North Dakota's had a pretty good run over the last 25 years. And it's not like we're going to walk in and dump the table over and say we're starting all over. We're going to figure out where we can create efficiencies, where we can let taxpayers keep more of their money, and where we can just get the government out of people's lives where it's not absolutely necessary.
How do you, you mentioned you're going to be stepping right into a legislative session. Sometimes it's been said that there's been a disconnect between Bismarck and the constituents in this state. Mm-hmm. How do you plan to keep that alive?
Well, I would hope I don't keep the disconnect alive. Everybody makes promises. I can guarantee you this. I'll be the most successful governor we've had in my lifetime.
Okay.
I have the same cell phone number when I was a baseball coach, the same cell phone number when I was a lawyer. And if you're in a room of over 100 people and you don't have my cell phone number, somebody at the table you're at does. Yeah. I think it's the only way to do this, right? And I'm going to work. I don't view the governor as the legislator's boss. I view him as a partner.
Yeah.
And I don't view the constituents of North Dakota. I feel like I work for them.
Right.
So the only way I know how to do that is to get out, go and figure out what people are talking about. And then, people have conversations with people. You're never going to agree with everybody all the time.
Right.
But be honest with them and I always say this, really good lawyers become average lawyers because they quit trusting juries.
Okay.
As they get older, they're like, even though they could win the case, they settle the case.
Yeah.
Really good politicians and public servants become average because they don't trust their voters.
Yeah.
Turns out North Dakota has a lot of really smart people that have a really good idea what's going on, and listening to them is never going to be a bad idea.
Yeah, and kind of following up with that, in the last legislative session, there was a little bit of fighting, maybe not a lot, a little bit of fighting between legislators and the governor.
That's always existed. Yeah. Particularly when the Democratic Party is not really strong there's always going to be that push and pull.
Do you think it's important to build better relationships, though, between the governor's office and the legislature?
Yeah, and I don't think that doesn't mean I won't fight with them.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty proud. You know, when I was the state party chair and chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the state of North Dakota stole hundreds of millions of dollars of property from farmers and ranchers in western North Dakota. It's easy to fight with Democrats. I do it every day in D.C. It's a lot harder to fight with your friends in the executive branch that you consider that you like, love, and respect. And I took them on.
Absolutely.
like this is wrong, and I'm not going to allow it to happen. I don't take anything personally, and I will work very hard not to treat anybody in a way that they take personally. But if I disagree with you and you're a legislator or a legislative committee, I'm going to let you know. And if we gotta have that debate, we're going to have the debate. Yeah. But it's going to be about ideas, not about criticizing people.
And that's good. That's what matters. Well, I really appreciate you stopping by our studio today. If someone wants to find more about you, which obviously they can just Google your name or support you, what's the best way?
Armstrong for Governor.
There you go.
ArmstrongforGovernor.com. We have Facebook. We have Instagram. We have X. We have all of those different things. And then if we haven't been around your community yet, we sure will be. And we're going to be out on the road as much as we possibly can.
Absolutely. Well, thank you.
Thanks.
This has been another episode of the Dakotans Election Central, where we are comprehensively covering the 2024 North Dakota election cycle. I'm Jonathan Starr. Be sure to go to mydakotan.com, click Election Central. There you'll find everything that we have going on. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us. Become part of the Dakotan community. Thanks and have a great day.